Good morning, guys. This morning we're going to talk about how to dry commercial building materials and maybe some unique building materials at the same time. A lot of people think when you go in and dry a house that is 1,000 square feet, that if you dry a 100,000 square feet building, it's simple. You just do the same thing 100 times. Nothing can be further from the truth. There's a lot of unique building materials in commercial buildings. There's a lot of unique things that you'll bump into that I want to try to make you aware of in the before you get there. Stuff to look for. For example, if you look on the left side of this picture and those little lights in the stairways, you don't see a lot of that in residential applications, but do see it in commercial applications a good bit, and a lot of different decorative materials, a lot of different complex materials, a lot of materials that you really sort of kind of don't have an idea what even the name of them is and how they're built and how they're put together. So you have to sit back and look at that and try to figure that out. Sometimes you might take pictures and call someone who maybe knows more about the building, that type of building material than you do. So coming out with new stuff all day, every day. And in the commercial world, they've already had some of it out for a while before they send it to residential. I know this is a picture of a house. You've all done houses, but if you look to the left on the commercial background with the multi-story building in the back that looks like a prison behind it, a lot of different things that are different in houses when you get into 2, 3 stories, 5 stories, 10 stories, 11 stories. So there's a lot of different things that you're looking for in the commercial building industry that you need to anticipate before you get into it or before you get into that project. Here we have a multi-floor building. Now the common thing that a lot of multi-floor buildings have is the first 2 to 3 floors, as this building would represent, are all different. You have your lobbies in hotels, you have your office buildings, you have retail space in the bottom of them. You'll have meeting rooms, you may have ballrooms. You've got escalators going between the 2 or 3 floors, because with meeting rooms and ballrooms, you'll have high traffic areas that would be way too much for an elevator system. When a ballroom turns out with 600 people in it, it takes way too long to get them all down the elevator, not to mention the fire hazard. So first 2 or 3 floors with a lot of meeting rooms are all laid out different. They're chopped up differently, some big open areas, stuff like that. Your elevator shafts alone and your escalator shafts alone are unique to what anything you'd find in a residential setting. And those escalator shafts have to be dealt with differently. And you've got to have somebody lined up in your team of people and in your list of go-to subcontractors that can handle those escalator shafts for you in short order. Because if these folks have a big party or a big convention or big meetings for this coming weekend, they're going to expect you to have this back together and ready to go by the time they need it. And that don't mean you have time to call Tom, Dick, and Harry and start looking for a new escalator repair company. No pun intended there, Mr. Wagner. But anyway, so have those people lined up. A lot of your escalator companies also do elevators. Otis is a big one, several big ones. But find somebody in your area, go have lunch with them. Tell them you're not going to need them often, but when you do, you're going to need them quick. And get that arrangement made before you're standing in the building at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, not knowing who to call or what to do. Now, the next thing you'll notice on this building, in the areas above those 3 floors, it looks like it's probably got 15 to 20 floors above that. For the most part, those floors are normally typed to be identical. You can see here by the way the protrusions are coming out that a lot of the balconies are different. The balconies may be bigger. Your rooms on the right end of the building are probably suites, and those rooms are probably bigger, but they're probably identical on each floor. That's pretty common. So when you get to that fourth or fifth floor on that building and you get into the multiple floor rooms, whether it be an office building or a hotel room, those floors are normally identical. Now, you will have some buildings that will have alternating identical floors because they may jut out because of the architecture of the building or something like that. But when you have identical floors, it makes your floor sketching and your layouts a little bit easier. It also makes, once you figure out how to dry the wettest one and you start up through the stack of floors, it makes it a little easier. However, with a commercial building, usually the water damage runs like an hourglass. On the floor that causes the damage, water will spread out pretty far and wide, and then it'll start down, and then at some point it will get to a narrow point, and then it'll start to spread back out. So you get sort of an hourglass effect. It's usually caused by chases or plumbing holes or voids, or it could even be like a garbage chute or something that the water is found somewhere down through there, and the water is found and it decides it's going to run straight through for just a small period of time. Now, between the floors in the buildings, besides the elevator shafts and the stairways, are supposed to be pretty much airtight for fireproofing. So if you have smoke and fire on one floor, it don't rapidly ascend to the other floor. Besides through the stairways and the elevator shafts, your trash chutes, laundry chutes, different things like that, both make a good place for smoke and water both to go. Also makes a good place for you to run your electrical cabling up through, and a lot of times even use those chases for a way to run hot dry air if you're using a desiccant dryer to get your desiccant air up through the building instead of trying to stretch a yellow hose 120 feet in the air that'll wind up weighing 1,100 to 1,200 pounds. Sometimes it's simple that you can use a garbage chute or a laundry chute to duct your air up through there. Both of those chutes would obviously be just a big air duct. Your elevator shaft fits into the same category. If your elevator is not being used, have the fire department come out, open the doors for you, put a template in the bottom floor and put a template on the floors you need them on. A very sturdy plywood template, obviously for safety, but run your air through the elevator shaft. It's just simply a big, large airway or ductway that's already running up through the building. So a lot of times you can decrease the amount of time that it takes you to run a air duct from the top floor to the bottom floor. Also, if you're familiar with desiccant dehumidifiers, which are most of the time your dehumidifier of choice in a commercial building, just because of size, one desiccant will usually do somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 square feet. So you get a lot more size. You have almost no power requirements coming out of the building for your dehumidifiers. Most of those run off of a generator, and it's simply a lot easier setup to set up one desiccant dehumidifier to do 20,000 feet than it would be set up 30 portable dehumidifiers that all have to run on electricity. In commercial buildings, a lot of times they're sized and checked out for a certain amount of amp draw, so you may run out of electricity. They also have 3 legs of electricity coming into them. Three-phase electricity, so you'll have three heights. If you were to go in and pick out the wrong leg to put all your portable equipment on, and you're pulling all the electricity off one or two legs and leaving the other one, you get what's referred to as an unbalanced load. That can be both a fire hazard, it can also be a trip hazard for your main breakers coming into the building. You need an industrial electrician to figure that out. But back to the electrical or the desking component where you won't have to have as much electrical, makes it a little easier to set that up. However, most of your desking dehumidifiers will run out of static pressure somewhere around 10 or 11 floors. So if you're trying to go higher than that, it can be difficult. So you have to put pressure boosters in or come up with alternative methods of pulling negative air on your shaft to be able to get hot, dry air into the other areas of the building. So just some of the little bit of the fun things about the descant drying and about multiple floor drying as you come in to buildings. We also see a lot of times with hotel rooms that you run your ductwork down the hallway, and then that gets dry air into all of your rooms. Of course, evaporation caused by air movement won't change. You still need good evaporation throughout the building. So a little bit about your multi-floor buildings, your multi-construction buildings where they have identical floors on. Again, different building materials. Do we have wood? Do we have concrete? Do we have brick? Do we have permanent stone? What are these building materials? In today's world, when they're building new materials, you have no idea what's in those materials. It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell if they're real. It's hard to tell if they're fake. So keep a watch for that. Make sure you know what is in your building materials. And sometimes you have to take a test and go through your tests and really find out what you've got. With drying any building, residential or commercial, you cannot dry what you don't know what you're drying. You got to find out what the material is. Sometimes that means a little bit of destructive testing. Sometimes that means drilling a hole in, blow a baseboard and getting a sample of what you're doing. But be sure after you get your asbestos test that if you have to drill a hole into something, find out what you're drying. If you go out and make a mistake on a house and you can't get a wall that looks like brick dry and you have a problem with that and it grows a little bit of mold behind it, it's probably not going to bankrupt your company. It's probably not going to cause you to shut down. It's probably not going to be a life-changing event. It's a wall in a house, okay. Probably got enough insurance to cover that. What if that same wall is on 4 walls of that first building we showed that's 20 stories tall? And now you've got to redo all 4 walls of that building that's 20 stories tall. The cheapest part about that will be redoing the walls in that 20-story building by tearing them out, getting it redone, getting everything redone and refurnished and cleaned is the cheapest part. Your most expensive part of that is going to be your loss of business for that building owner while you're having to do all that. So you've got to take a lot more time. You've got to get qualified people in to look at what you're tearing apart, to look at what you're trying to dry, and to look at how you're trying to dry it before you just jump in head first. Let's look at this big warehouse full of materials here that's stacked in there, and it's probably not anybody listening to this slide that hadn't in some time in life been riding down the road in the rain and see the Lowe's or the Home Depot or the ABC truck riding down the road with the load uncovered and it's pouring down rain. They're all in plywood, they're all in sheetrock, they're all in all kind of different building materials, and it's raining. So even though your building has only been wet for 7 hours, when you get the call and you jump on it and you get in there real quick, who's to say that you're not dealing with a product that was contaminated several years ago? It grew some mold on the backside of it several years ago, and now that we've introduced new moisture to that, it started to grow very rapidly. And you're not understanding why. It's only been wet 7 hours. The book says mold can't start growing for 72 hours or something. First place, the book's wrong. It depends on your temperature, time temperature, air stagnant, and all the things you already know about or should already know about mold if you're even dabbling in the commercial market. But who's to say there's not already been a problem there? Years and years ago, I worked for the largest sheetrock company in the state of Tennessee. When we had to form a radius with sheetrock, one of my jobs was to wet the backside of the sheetrock with a garden hose and a pump sprayer to get it wet enough to bend around the radius. And that's how we done it back 30 years ago. Obviously, I don't think we do that anymore. We do it with different methods. But if you're working on a building that I built 30 years ago and that I sprayed with water so we could bend a radius or a curve in sheetrock, then you're dealing with some sheetrock that may very well already be susceptible to a large mold growth. Now, if you find one of those buildings, I'll be quick to tell you I'm not the one that done that. But other than that, those are the things you got to look out for. Let's look at the next slide over. That's in wood. Let me back up. That's in wood. That's in sheetrock. It's your plywood. It's in all kinds of building materials. We've all seen it raining while the roofers are trying to finish the roof. Well, the water's getting on the plywood while they're still nailing shingles on. That water just don't magically disappear. It gets into that wood, and you may have a mold situation growing in that plywood in a couple of months, and you may not be on that job for several years. So mold lays dormant. It don't just disappear when it runs out of water. It's like a grass seed that's in the bag on the top shelf of the room. It'll lay there forever until you sow that seed and put some moisture with it. Then it'll start to grow. And that's the same identical way that mold will do. Let's look at this new building. Been in business 41 years. Until 2 to 3 years ago, I never got calls about new construction mold. And now I've probably had 6 or 8 different companies call me within the past few years that say, hey, I need you to come look at this building with me. The studs are gray, the floors are gray, we've seen a little mold growth, but this just looks awful. And the building inspectors come by and he wants insurance that that's clean before we start to put sheetrock up. And it's a 5-story building. It's taken them 6 months to get it built up to that point and to get the roof on it. And it simply looks awful. Well, we need a protocol from an indoor air quality person or an industrial hygienist of how to do that. So a lot of people go in and spray some peroxide or bleach products on that and bleach the wood out or peroxide the wood out and make it look bright and make it look new. But you got to make sure within the protocol that fits what you need it to be doing for you. That don't necessarily get rid of the mold. You might have killed it or you might have simply bleached it or colored it out and make it go away. But that's not helping you a whole lot if it comes to the fact that you've got to insure this project and make sure that it's going to be clean and healthy for the 55 families that are going to move into it. Imagine getting 55 families in a moldy building that you went in and sprayed foo-foo juice on to make it look good to help the contractor get rid of the problem that he created. This is not your problem at that point, so don't buy it. Make sure you do these jobs correctly. Don't go after that quick buck of going. You're a lot better to lose that job than you are to have to deal with the ramifications later if it's not done properly. Now, I'm not saying some of the peroxide and bleach products are not good to use. I'm not saying there are, I'm not saying there aren't. I'm saying go by what the industrial hygienists or indoor air quality professionals are telling you and how to deal with that as you're telling, as they're writing the protocol for doing that. You may want to dry ice blast. You may want to soda blast. You may want to do any other type of media blasting that's available on the market to get that wood clean and back to an inhabitable area. But the new construction market is growing in this field because people are getting more and more and more sensitive of what moisture does to wood during the building process. Sheetrock. A lot of difference between 5/8 and 1/2 inch when you're looking at sheetrock. Somebody in there, I'm sure, is a mathematician. If I'm just guessing off the top of my head, maybe 20% different. So when you're looking at drying something in 3 days, but now you've made it 20% thicker, it's going to take longer to dry. I'm not sure about that 3 day in a commercial setting. One of the problems we have in commercial work is it takes 3 days to get the job set up a lot of times. You've got a large area to work with, you've got a large area to map, to figure out how much equipment you need, to mobilize personnel, to get a lot of different things done. Very, very, very few buildings in the commercial setting get dry in 3 days. You may occasionally have a few motel rooms that you can rush in there and be really aggressive with and get done in 3 days, but don't let the problem that these building owners and managers have of needing to get their building occupied and to get people back in their building become your problem when they call you back several weeks later and say, hey, you did this dry for me over at the big hotel chain, and by the way, we got mold coming through the wallpaper now. So a lot of people try to dry through vinyl wallpaper. It's like trying to dry through a 2-liter jug. Now, can you inject air into the walls and dry from behind it? Can you peel the wallpaper up and dry it and place it back down? Can you do a lot of inventive things to reach the goal of putting your customer back in the building? If it's a motel, a favorite saying that Mr. Wagner has that all hotel owners have is they want heads in beds. They don't care about your excuses. They don't care why it takes so long. They're not making money and they're not servicing their client if they don't have heads in beds. So you may have to come in and dry on a hotel for a few days. And then let some people move in and come back out and finish drying it, but don't leave that building wet, because the necessity of that guy needing heads in beds can really quickly become your problem. One of the most common areas we see in a commercial building for hidden mold and areas of problem are around the janitor sinks, the mop sink, whatever you want to call it. Now, that may not be the source of the water damage you're there to work on. That may be a completely different issue. But if you're working in the general area that these closets are in, and there's usually one on every floor, if not more than one, you still have this problem to deal with. So regardless of where the water damage came from, regardless of how long the water's been on the building or in the building, or how long you've been working on it, you need to really inspect these areas of mop sinks and mop closets and janitorial closets. Inspect them really well. You'll be surprised at how many times when we get the key to open that area, that when they built the building, they never even painted the walls. So you have no protection from moisture at all on the sheetrock when they're getting their mops wrung out, or they're drawing water into the mop buckets, or whatever they're using to clean up in that sink. So a great place for mold infestation and for problems start out in these areas. So always find them and always look at them. It's always that closet that is locked up that you can't get to that will cause you the problems. So you got to be persistent when you get on these jobs, and make sure that you can look at each area that you need to look at. Different construction on the outside of buildings can cause a lot of different challenges for drying buildings. These prefab buildings that they put together in factories somewhere and ship over to put together like Tonka toys can be particularly challenging. Everywhere there's a seam in this Tonka toy they're putting together is a place for water to hide and for water to get. Their insulating qualities are a lot different. A lot of the times you'll see blown in or sprayed in insulation. You may see Hypalon insulation. A lot of different things that you need to look at for here because, once again, as I said a little bit earlier, you've got to know what you're drying. If you don't know what you're drying, chances are you're not going to be successful drying it at all. So you got to figure out what kind of insulation. You have a lot more trouble on the outside walls than you do interior walls. I'm not suggesting to discount the interior wall at all. I'm just telling you you're 10 times more likely to have a problem with the outside wall. The reason being they want to put a really good coating on that for energy saving and to insulate the noise of the traffic outside the building from coming to the inside. Another thing you'll see on both the interior and exterior walls of the commercial buildings, multiple layer walls. A lot of that's done for soundproofing. Most hotels on the party wall, being the wall that separates one room from the other, will have a layer of sheetrock and a layer of plywood that the sheetrock's attached to. Then they'll have a 6-inch party wall in between them, crown full of insulation. Then on the other side, you've got another layer of plywood and another layer of sheetrock. Now, if you're not drilling holes into that wall and inspecting what you've got inside the wall, the chances you getting the wood and stuff inside that wall dry through a layer of 5/8 sheetrock and a layer of 3/4-inch plywood, that it would be nearly impossible to get that dry. So you've got to drill holes in that and figure out what you are drying and what you're not drying, and to figure out what's going on with it. All your commercial buildings are going to be built with 5/8 fire sheetrock for fire code. Now that's a 30-minute fireproof wall. If it's a corridor wall in a hotel or an office building, you may very well have one of those corridor walls, or maybe even both of them, to have 2 layers of 5/8 sheetrock on them. That gives you a 1-hour fire rating. Most all of your stairways, if they're not constructed out of concrete block, will have 2 layers of 5/8 sheetrock on them, so you get that 1-hour fire rating on the wall. Some elevator shafts may have as many as 4 layers of sheetrock in low-rise buildings. A lot of low-rise buildings will have sheetrock elevator shafts. When you get into high-rises, they normally are built out of concrete. I have seen some as tall as 8 stories with 4 layers of sheetrock. You get those wet from overhead, and they're really challenging to dry. Other areas you may have in lodges or some unique buildings, and you've got to once again know what you're drying. Take this job, for example. The 3/4-inch tongue and groove planking on the walls of this has cellulosic insulation behind it. And then on top of all that, when the cellulosic insulation was blown in, then the board was put on. And then after that construction was done, this chimney or fireplace was rocked around it. So it would be virtually impossible to dry that cellulosic insulation behind that chimney area without getting to it, and the only way to get through this would probably be from the opposing wall. Those areas you don't want to let mold. You don't want that to get out of control. You don't want that to be something that's not your problem that you have to deal with later. One excellent way of getting to figure out what's going on with this wall may be to come to this light fixture on the right side of the photo there and take that light fixture down, and maybe you'd have to take the box in there loose, but to be able to inspect the hole in that wood wall that's in there so you see what you got. You've got to know what you're drying so you can know if you can dry it or not. The same lodge that you're seeing here, other unique challenges, your ceiling height of about 30 feet. You've got hollow chase wall beams and support structures through here that create challenges when you're dealing with that. A challenge in itself is 3/4 inch planking that's wet. It's like drying a hardwood that's on a ceiling. Once again, take some of these light fixtures out, look in those holes, see what you're drying, and figure that out. You also see the flat spot right over here in this area of this particular ceiling. There's about a 3-foot void up in there. Who knows what's up in that 3-foot void? Well, I don't want to damage the wood, and I don't want to get into the ceiling, and I'm sure you don't. But you don't want that to mold and that to become your problem later on, not the problem of who has it right now. Right now, you're getting paid to fix the problem. You don't want to turn that around as to be the one paying to fix the problem. Another little attic area right here that looks very small. That's a chase and void in there. That's likely part of the structure of the building to hold up the wind beams in it. A lot of different challenges when you get into these even smaller commercial buildings that you're going to be looking at. Types of insulation that you have. There's several different types of insulation that you can be looking at. This is a foil back insulation. The foil back here would have some type of foam insulation above it, and but water's not going to come through that foam. That's going to act as a vapor barrier. So you're going to have to look at that and make sure you know what type of insulation you have. You can have fiberglass insulation, which is a little bit easier to dry. However, if it's laying horizontally with fiberglass and the water causes the fiberglass to compact, you lose your R value. So you may have to take that out. So learn your insulations. If you don't know different types of insulation, take a trip to Home Depot or Lowe's or ABC Building and Roofing Materials and study these insulations. Get a sample of it, carry it home, and get familiar with it. It's not the same as residential. Different type. There's a bigger picture of the insulation there, and then here's some areas you got here where you got one roof put on and another roof built down into that roof. So be careful when you get into unique situations like that. Chases and ductwork and walls. Here you have a HVAC duct with a chase built all the way around it. You'll see the insulation around it. These walls here are probably insulated as well. When you get water in the middle of that chase duct, you've got to figure out how to get that water out. You may have to drill holes in there to get that out. Once again, this is not your problem unless you choose to purchase it and take it upon yourself to pay for that. You've got to find that in the beginning stages. You've got to find these hidden chases and these hidden ducts. And a lot of times the way these commercial buildings are designed, you will never know they're there until you really do some really, really, really deep investigating. Oh, I'll just get a copy of the blueprint. Fat chance with that. We usually get a blueprint on about 1 in 20 buildings, and then when you do get them, they're so complicated that it takes an architect to read them. So you'll still have some problems with that. Floor plan's easy enough to read, but that's not the only thing you'll need to be able to do that. Got a lot of investigative work. You need somebody walking around all day, every day, thinking like water, looking for voids, looking for troubled areas to dry. This is not a $10,000 job that you're going to blow and lose $10,000 because you left something wet. This is a $100,000 job, and your loss of business is likely to be $300,000 if you screw it up and you don't get things dry as you go through it. You've got to do these commercial buildings right. They're not easy, but they're not that difficult either. You just got to know to investigate and don't get in a big hurry. Another example of a chase that they're built over to encapsulate ductwork. In most of your houses, ductwork's either in the attic or it's in the floor. Well, you can't do that on a 20-story building. So those ductwork and those chases have to be somewhere. You've got to find them and you've got to know where they're at. Don't let that water hide from you. Also see in the top of this chase up here, you got a layer of sheetrock here and then a moldy 2x4 in the truss up there. So you've already got mold growing there, and then you got sheetrock on top of that for fireproofing, and then they fire taped it right in this area. They got all that done. And when they got all that done, they built the framing down under there to frame in this chase to make it decorative. And now you're going to have sheetrock all the way around that. How you going to get this layer of sheetrock here dry if you don't tear that out and you don't know what you're drying? How are you going to get any of it dry if you don't get the water out from this foil-lined ducting in there? So you can get some complicated drying in there. So just keep all that in mind. A lot of different types of flood-resistant materials. They're good and they sound good. And we got waterproof flooring in this building. It can't get hurt. Well, the flooring may not get hurt. But if you get water trapped between the waterproof flooring and the plywood below it, you've still got the same moisture problem, if not worse, than you would have if carpet's on it. Because if it's waterproof flooring, it's also airproof. So you can't get air through it. So you've got to be really, really careful about the different types of building materials that you use. We could go on and on and on about building materials. You can never get to all of them, so we're just going to say to be continued. So what I encourage all of you to do, every time you go into a commercial building and you're standing back in awe and looking at the beauty of the architecture and how it's built, and you're getting ready to go to your meeting or go to your hotel room, just stop for a few minutes and look up at it and say, how would I dry this building? What would be the challenges of this building? And put a little time and thought into that, so this can be continuing from now on and on and on, because each commercial building has its own signature and will be a lot more difficult to dry than the one before it, or maybe a lot easier than the one before it. But keep your head in the game, investigate different types of building materials, take some time out to go look at them. Hope you've enjoyed the presentation from the CREST organization. I am Scott Tarpley. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to give me a call at any time. Thank you.